Hello and welcome. I'm just going to wait for another minute or so because I can see the numbers of participants still going up a little bit. We'll start at exactly the top of the hour, or half past if you're in India, I think. Okay. So welcome one and all to this webinar on redefining leadership in global neuroscience. This is brought to you by the Neuroscience Capacity Accelerator for Mental Health, or NCAM. I'm Dr. Emma Byrne, a neuroscience researcher and communicator, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. So NCAM is administered by the International Brain Research Organization, and it supports collaborative research projects led by researchers from low and middle income countries focused on anxiety, depression, and psychosis. NCAM has supported 23 impactful collaborations so far. In the first two cohorts of the project, awardees have participated in 12 professional development activities led by 32 speakers, and they've received 54 hours of training and networking opportunities. These sessions have equipped them with essential skills such as grant writing, grant management, data management and visualization, science communications, leadership, and most importantly, the integration of lived experience in neuroscience research. This webinar today explores how low and middle income country researchers can move from participants to facilitators to leaders of global research agendas. To that end, we're pleased to have one person who has sent a presentation by video. Unfortunately, they can't join us today, but two people who are here with us who are NCAM recipients. So first, we'll be hearing by video from Professor Anthony Fagaji, who is the Director of African Brainchild and the Chair of Clinical Neurosciences at the South African National Research Foundation. After that, I'm really pleased to welcome Dr. Juan Belforte, who is an NCAM grant awardee and a neuroscientist at the University of Buenos Aires. Juan specializes in the neurobiology of psychiatric disorders. And last but by no means least, Dr. Siti Yusuf, NCAM awardee and Deputy Director of the Center for Drug Research at the University Sans Malaysia. We will have time for questions to our speakers at the end of the session, so please put them into the Q&A facility. And at the end of the webinar, you'll be sent a survey to complete. Once you fill this in, you'll receive your certificate of attendance. And also, we really appreciate your feedback. It helps us shape future events. So without further ado, we're going to hear by video from Professor Anthony Fagaji.
Good afternoon. I want to start by just apologizing not to be there in person or in person online and to be delivering this. If you're listening to the recorded version, then I've been called away, unfortunately, on my clinical commitments, which is something that will probably come up as a talking point as we go along through the talk. The second thing that I want to mention is that these are my personal observations. This is not some textbook chapter or a letter to the editor or an article that you will read. This is based on my experience and my interpretation of those experiences, and others may have different experiences or interpretations. So I wanted to speak about equity in research and leadership across high-income countries and low-income country regions. And I wanted to start just by defining my leadership roles. So I have both locally a clinical and a research or clinical and research leadership roles. In leadership in particular, I'm director of a group that we call African Brainchild. And then regionally and internationally, I've had the opportunity to either lead organizations or to be part of the leadership that has shaped my thinking about leadership in general, what we're trying to achieve, and how we navigate this relationship between LMICs and high-income countries. First, I wanted to start with how lived realities and the context of the work that we do affects our thinking. And for me, the way this is manifest is in the interface between the patients that I treat, the community that I try to affect, and research. And I think that interface really helps me. It helps me to be a better researcher. That clinical exposure helps me to be a better researcher because it helps me understand the critical questions that are important to ask, the lived reality of what people experience with the conditions that I'm trying to make a difference, how to design studies that matter and actually work to change people's realities in the way that that is meaningful for them. Also, how to interpret the results of studies. Is this statistically significant p-value? Is it meaningful to a patient's life? And is it plausible? You can only really understand that if you understand the condition. And then I have a relationship with that community, so it helps me bring in interventions and protocols and assess whether they're going to likely to make a difference. And then uh, it gives me the opportunity to evaluate the outcome of the interventions, both as a researcher and also on the behalf of the community, but whether it achieved its desired aim. And then being a researcher also helps me, I think, to be a better clinician because it helps me approach clinical decisions with the kind of methodological and scientific rigor that I've learned by being a researcher. It helps me understand and deal with uncertainty. And in the clinical environment, we deal with uncertainty all the time. This intervention versus that intervention, the pros and cons, the benefits and the risks, helps me recognize and control for confounders and biases. It also helps me interpret the published work of others to try to determine whether their results are generalizable to our community. And most importantly, it helps me in a very organized way to evaluate the impact of what we're doing. And there are amazing research opportunities to LMICs. Very often we really focused on the challenges, and the challenges are absolutely real. But those challenges, in the way that I think, and this is really important in my thinking, those challenges are the exact opportunities that we have. So in Africa in particular, we're very focused on the fact that we have very high mortality rates because it's true. That is compounded by the fact that we are inundated with clinical work. We have few resources, we have little staff, and we have the youngest population in the world and a very small population of people that contribute actively to research and service delivery. But there are other ways to look at it. The flip side of that coin is that those high mortality rates give us this incredible opportunity, this massive opportunity to make a difference. So it is like the Pareto principle, where 20% of the effort can create 80% of the benefit. We are inundated with clinical work, yes, but at the same time, that also creates this amazing opportunity to generate research and to train and educate, because those are all bolstered by access to large patient numbers, large cohorts, and incredibly diverse patient populations. We have few resources and little staff, but that also creates the environmental pressure for us to adapt, to innovate, and to multitask. And there are benefits in multitasking, absolutely. And then, yes, we have the youngest population in the world, but it also gives us this greatest opportunity to lead the world in child and adolescent care because our experience and expertise is driven by our exposure. But there are external challenges as well. And one of those major external challenges is that there are structural inequities in science and research and global neuroscience in particular, because that's the area that we're working in. And there are external factors that have limited our progress in developing research in LMICs. So one of them in neuroscience, for example, is that neuroscience funding and publishing, at least historically, has been heavily weighted to bench science in the global north. Whereas in LMICs, we often don't have that luxury because we need to bring research and science directly at least shaped by the clinical reality that we are in and targeted at benefiting patients with that clinical reality. The agenda for funding is usually set in high-income countries or the global north, whereas the burden of disease is almost always greater in LMICs. Editorial boards inevitably are dominated by researchers in high-income countries. There likely are bias in the way that editors and reviewers evaluate manuscripts, and as much as we try to offset this, but journals inevitably are influenced by the institution and the researcher. Commissioned articles are mostly from high-income countries, even when the condition being discussed is dominant in LMICs. And this is often generated from in-house discussions and networks that often exclude LMIC researchers. And then there are the high costs of open access publishing that are prohibitive, even when you factor into consider LMIC discounts. And all of these factors, and probably many more that I didn't touch on, create this vicious cycle where the poor stay poor and the rich get richer, or those in power remain in power, those who are disempowered never develop power. So what can we do about it? Well, I think there are a set of things that those in power can consider. One of them is to first acknowledge and intentionally address the systemic inequities. We have to level the playing field. I know some attempts have been made, and I've been in this work in research and clinical work for a long time. I've had some seniority, I've had some success, I've had many more failures, and I'm very clear in my mind that the playing field is by far, not anywhere close to being leveled. We have to plan ahead to enable LMICs to be competitive for open funding, and that has to be the goal. And to do that, we can't just focus on funding individual projects, but we need a long-term vision. So we need to fund platforms. We need to build platforms so they can support multiple projects that all will be sustainable in the future, and invest in building up the people who are going to be driving those projects. We have to move from nominal co-leadership to leadership where LMIC researchers can actually assist equally in setting the agenda. And it can't just be a nominal representative, and very often there is a nominal LMIC representative or a global section or a global journal where the LMIC research can go to. That doesn't affect lasting change. We can only do that when there is a serious commitment for parity and inclusion of LMIC representatives. I think if funders and journals want maximum global impact, they need those global voices. It's not just about diversity for the sake of it. And I think when we try to pursue diversity for the sake of it without thinking about what it means and why we want kind of diverse voices, then A, there's pushback, and B, we're not as effective as we should be. The importance about diversity is so that we can be more effective in our work. And we have to commit to playing the long game. As long as we focus on the short game, doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that, then we won't develop sustainable practices. And we have to define exactly what we need to achieve. We need to develop metrics, and we need to track our progress in that. And we need to hold ourselves to account for the progress that we intend to make in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term. I think also there are responsibilities on behalf of those who are disempowered currently, the LMIC investigators. We can't think about ourselves as victims all the time. We can't think of ourselves as people without agency. We do have really strong agency. We have amazing opportunities, and there are things that we need to do to ensure sustainability in our environment. We have to build systems. As I said earlier, it's not just about projects. We need to build platforms that are sustainable, not only for our generation, but for the generation to come. We have to find creative ways to incentivize a career in research all across the world. Of course, there's always a pull to the private sector. Committing yourself to an academic career is never one that's going to be the best economically viable option for people. That pull, or that the difficulty in those two relationships in the private sector, in the commercial sector versus the academic sector, is a lot stronger and a lot starker in LMIC regions than high-income countries. Permanent dependence on soft funding is incredibly destabilizing for academics. You never know whether you're going to be funded, how well you're going to be funded, and there are all sorts of knock-on effects of that. When we develop collaborations with high-income countries, we should stand our ground. We need to insist on equity in planning those projects, in the budget of those projects, and what the outputs would look like. We need to increasingly step up as primary principal investigators with international collaborators where there's specific expertise is needed. And to be competitive for open funding, we have to demonstrate the global value of our research in LMICs, not only local. Now, you have to be careful about this because we always have to be focused on our communities. But we have to be able to demonstrate that the value of our research is not only for us, but it is for the world. And in that regard, I think we need to diversify. So traditionally, the vast majority of funding has gone to, in Africa at least, has gone to infectious diseases. So the big three, TB, HIV, and malaria. And those are critically important, and I don't want to undermine that. However, the funding is often squeezed out the other priorities that we have in Africa or in LMICs. And neuroscience, of course, is a great example of that. And there are two problems with it. One is we don't address the neuroscience burden, or the burden of stroke, of meningitis, of congenital disorders, of traumatic brain injury, all these things that are very dominant in our population. So that's the one limitation of an infectious diseases approach, which often has been strategic because it's easier to find funding for infectious diseases, and that's certainly been my experience. It's much easier for me to fund an infectious diseases project than something else that I'm equally skilled at. The second problem is that there's always going to be a smaller pot of money for infectious diseases because the global north doesn't necessarily see the same amount of TB and HIV. And so for the larger pots of funding, we have to be able to compete for that. And to do that, we need to be skilled and we need to have robust platforms for those other areas of science that are as robust as the platform that we have created for infectious diseases. And neuroscience is, of course, one of them. Highly, highly relevant to our communities, so we're not compromising on that, but also relevant across the world. And so therefore, competitive for such open funding. We have to consider building regional centers of excellence because we can't be all of us expert in everything, but we have to find ways to work together, not just for the purposes of a grant. And then we have to define exactly what success means in a very brutally competitive world, because that is the space I believe that we should have the ambition to function in, and then we must reward it. And we have to dream bigger. We have to escape the poverty mindset. As long as we're only thinking going from small grant to small grant, doing this project and then a little bit of that project, we're never going to get into the place where we can start having a logarithmic increase in our outputs and our impact on our community. And there, I have to acknowledge there are different models. This is the model that works for us in African Brainchild. We focus on three domains: the bench work or the laboratory work, and those are really important for us to understand the mechanisms of disease. But we also have clinical projects where we try to develop or take the things that we've learned from the bench or the things that we've learned in clinical projects and apply it to kind of real patients in the domains that we function in the hospital, but then also recognizing that there are other stakeholders that also have an amazing or have a potential impact on the same patients that we trying to whose lives we are trying to improve, and we need to work with them to have the most the broadest and most holistic approach to making a difference in the lives of people, whether we're bringing expertise from the bench or our clinic or our community. And on that, thank you very much. I hope that my clinical work will enable me to join the Q&A session. But if not, again, thank you very much for having me, and good luck with the rest of the session. Thank you very much.
So please do continue to give us your questions for Anthony. We may be able to ask him those questions. And if not, there may also be things that our other speakers can speak to. So Speaking of our other speakers, let me introduce Dr. Juan Belforte. Juan, take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here with all of you, wherever you are in the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. And I will try to provide my perspective about topics that Anthony was talking about. Let me start with showing some of the barriers, structural asymmetries in the global research system that we are facing from Latin America and probably all the low middle income countries. This is just to show the data showing the number of full-time researchers per million of inhabitants in high-income countries and the rest of the economies. And you can see that we are much fewer wherever you are than in high-income countries. So obviously, having a labor force in research much smaller will produce a smaller output. This colored map of the world showing the number of publication in neuroscience in the last 10 years. And you can clearly see that it's correlated with the economy of the country, with the global north being overrepresented in the map. So I will try to provide you my ideas of which factors are determinant for these asymmetries and probably are global and share with my other colleagues. So the obvious point that we will think about is funding, which is true in low middle income countries, is limited but also unstable and usually short term. We are lacking long-term vision and programs that can sustain research for many years. But also, agenda setting is different between low middle income countries and high income countries. Usually, the agenda is set by the founders, usually in high-income countries, so it's externally influenced. Institutional support is weak in our countries and usually research dependent. So this translates much of the non-scientific work to the researcher, where high-income countries has developed a strong system-supported system for the research. Infrastructure is fragmenting and developing. Each new technological development that emerge in the science field increase the gap between our economies and the central countries. Collaboration are offered asymmetrically, as Anthony was mentioning, and with low middle income countries usually following the lead of a PI or a lab in a central country where it's collaborating, and I will touch a little bit more about this. Visibility is lower and critical mass, we are fewer. We have seen this in the first slide. So it's very easy leading to intellectual isolation and the lack of collaboration in the local field. So we need to start thinking how to turn these barriers that also, and more importantly, they are intermixed. They are not independent one from each other. For instance, the lack of funding will produce weak institution, fragmented infrastructure. If you need to develop time that the institution is not providing to you, you don't have much time for applying for grants or for looking for visibility. So this constitutes a complex network of barriers that we need to overcome. And to think about this, I will take an example. The barrier that I choose is the collaboration asymmetries. And we need to think that collaboration is, it doesn't mean instant, collaboration should not be, will not lead immediately to equity. The collaboration will be asymmetrically, that is mostly the case in our countries. The agenda is set unilaterally, the topics, the themes are centrally mandated. Usually samples, data, and researchers move from low middle income countries to high income countries. And the credit, even the credit of the work is concentrated in leading countries. This is a study, this is an example of this. This is a published paper showing that low middle income countries the researchers from these countries are less likely to be first or last authors, even when the studies are conducting in the low middle income countries. So this presents a challenge, and we have opportunities to overcome this. And the first thing we need to consider is that the solution is not less collaboration, it's a better collaboration. We need to start thinking in co-design research questions, share leadership, program that has co-PI are better option than one PI and collaborators. We need to start looking for collaboration that build up local capacities, that they are not just prepared for sharing samples. We need to share resources. Fair authorship practices need to be introduced, and long-term partnership are better option than project-based interaction collaborations. I have one example of this that I'm part of, which is the SPIRIT program from the Swiss National Science Foundation. And one interesting point they found is that they require that the topic in which the central and peripheral labs are collaborating, it's a new one. Should not be a topic or a theme that has been already taken by one of these partners. In this way, they encourage the people to truly collaborate and to set up an agenda jointly, and just not an agenda that is imposed from the central high-income countries. And also, they allocate a fixed amount of money at minimum for each partner. So this is one way to overcome these barriers. And Anthony mentioned many of them. I will leave you this slide with several possible strategies to overcome, to navigate these constraints. We talk about collaboration, funding, infrastructure. We are really needing programs that co-finance shared infrastructure facilities in South America and Latin American countries. And I will focus in the main attitudes that we need to change. So low middle income countries should start shifting from complaining-based narratives toward action-oriented engagement. We need to stop complaining about the situation and lead a change. We need to promote proactive participation. We need to encourage our PIs, our researchers, to become leaders to produce this change. High-income countries need to understand the impact of the asymmetries that we are talking about, and to translate equity and inclusivity principles into institutional policies. In this way, we can increase low-middle income participation in agenda setting and decision-making bodies, and this will lead to a real change. NCAMH program that I'm part of is a very fundamental program for me, and is tackling this problem. It's looking to foster impactful collaboration, and the important word here is impactful. It's not just a program for exchange of a student. They are building up capacities through a specific program, through a specific activities. This is a meeting we have in Cape Town, and we met all together. And it's very instrumental to tackle some of the problems we're talking about. So, for instance, this program is shifting local middle-income countries now are low-middle-income countries plus NCAMH program. And in this way, we shift from externally influenced to locally defined problems. Funding is not limited and stable, still short-term, because NCAMH program, it's a short-term program, but they tackle this problem of short-term by allowing you to produce preliminary data and training you to move forward to the next step. So institutional support is strong, since the commitment of Wellcome and Hebrew institutions are well-known institutions that provide very nice institutional support. Infrastructure, this is not a program for infrastructure. We are looking for other ways to produce a change in this aspect. The collaboration are symmetrical. This is a program that supports co-PIs. It provides global visibility in activities like this webinar and promote global connections. And the proof of this global connection is that we met all together, and we have now a huge net of collaborators and people sharing ideas across the world. And one of these person is Siti, the next speaker. I am really pleased to be part of a seminar with her, and I will share the word to Siti. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. That was a great sharing. So from Africa to Latin America, now I'm bringing you to Southeast Asia. So here I would like to raise some issues and also to suggest some possible solutions moving forward. So I like to not to raise to overclaim here. So I'm leaning towards observations and my own interpretation, and none of it is actually a published study like the previous speaker did. Okay. Right. In Southeast Asia, we have 11 countries. And out of those 11, 9 are categorized as low or middle income countries. And we are in NCAMH webinar. So on the topic of mental health burden in Southeast Asia, 1 in 7 people actually are living with mental health disorders. And unfortunately, the treatment gaps for mental health conditions are as high as 90%. So this is mainly due to the services are more concentrated to the urban areas, and also shortages of trained personnel are actually contributing to the treatment gaps. However, the true burden of mental health and also the treatment gaps are actually unknown due to underreporting of data from government agencies and also from private entities. So we do have service gap, resources gap, and information gap. To add to that, in our community, myth, stigma, and discrimination can be widespread. And being in Southeast Asia, where we are in the region with high vulnerability to be affected by climate change, if you talk about raising temperatures or global warming, here we are facing it twice as more as the rest of you guys in other parts of the world. And we are also, some areas are prone to flooding and air pollution that we have annually. So all of these can further contribute or exacerbate mental health disorders. Realizing this, WHO for Southeast Asia actually have published a mental health action plan from 2023 to 2030, where member states are committed to 4 objectives, which are to strengthen policies and laws, to provide services, comprehensive services, and also responsive services, to educate, to prevent, and to promote education on mental health, and also to strengthen information system and also research in mental health. Talking about research, we do have active research in mental health within the region, but however, due to lack of resources, we have a lack of large-scale study and longitudinal study that can generate comprehensive data or meaningful data that is enough for policy implementation. And our regional funding are mainly concentrated or focused on agricultural technology, food security, climate resilience, which are all understandable because these are all issues related to existence. So I'm not undermining any of these actually, but because of this, we have low priority for funding in neuroscience and mental health research. But I have to take note here, or I have to highlight here, there has been shift in recent years on awareness to fund research in mental health. This is one good example that we have recently, C-Dream. This is also in partnership with Wellcome Trust to fund research in mental health, infectious disease, and so on. This can be led by Southeast Asian PIs that form a research consortium between multiple countries. And we always have opportunities for research collaboration with researchers from high-income countries. And we also have opportunity for joint applications for international grants. So these opportunities are always there. But when we think about it, have you thought about, is there equity in research leadership? I'd like to invite you to think more about where research questions are defined. From my observation and maybe personal experience, research questions are often defined in high-income settings, where researchers in high-income settings have access to advanced technologies, which can sometimes influence priorities, and also which neuroscience models are considered as gold standard, okay, because they have access to all the nice technologies. So the methods in neuroscience model can be sometimes regarded as gold standard. And funding streams can also favor established labs in high income settings where they are capable to include nice preliminary data for grant applications, and also there might be perceptions of reliability and quality of science that are generated from these labs. Then that leave the research teams in low and middle income countries responsible for just the implementation of the project. And this can relate to cost effectiveness. Sometimes it could be much cheaper to conduct the work here. For example, the cost of research consumables and so on. And also they might be easier to recruit study participants. And also there is a perception of less rigorous study protocol approvals involving human and also animals, because in some countries in the global north, research experiments on animals may be a bit more limited now. And being in tropical country where you have high biodiversity or resources, the rainforests, which are all open to be developed for to get a new drug, for example. So we need to realize, the intention to collaborate or just to participate in this study. So there lies the inequity in practice. When we have lack of input into the study design, it is hard for researchers in LMICs to assume leadership. We don't feel like we are leader in such project. And also often we have budget limitations or limited controls to budget. So there's no opportunity for laboratory upgrade, and also we will be continuously limited by technology. And there is apparent high-income country and low-income country power imbalance, with decision-making authority often lies within the high-income country researchers. And the consequences of this is that we then have limited flexibility to adapt tools or findings to our cultural context. We have different genetic variability, multiracial countries, and so on. And of course, then we had lost opportunities for research translations to regional policies. Then how do we go about this? What is the forward solutions to this? So we know that if you want to involve LMIC researchers, they need to be involved early from study conceptualization. The research questions need to be co-designed and also find a point of mutual interest to conduct and pursue with the study. And it's good to have shared budget control. So this is where it will greatly benefit the low middle income country researchers, where we can invest in laboratory infrastructure, and also we can have a nice upgrades to our technology in the lab. And the key is, or the strength is also to have contextual adaptation. This is whatever that we do, whatever the research that we undertake need to be relevant to our cultural context, to our local context. Then we will have a more impactful research outcome. This will redefine research excellence beyond publications. And other form of leaderships can be in a form of board representations, for example, like the IBRO model of regional representative. I think this is a key for our voice to be heard. Of course, the forward solutions are inspired by the model of NCAMH, and where all the researchers were involved early in designing experiments and defining research questions, and the research questions generates or originates from LMIC researchers themselves. And in NCAMH, we have peer learning across LMICs, and we also have, like the previous speakers have highlighted, we have the mentoring or capacity development program. And these are actually empowered us and equip us with tools that we need to be a better research scientist. And with NCAMH, I think the strength is the building or the strengthening of LMIC collaborations. But I need to highlight that for us here, I think some of us can be a bit shy. I think for researchers in this side of the world, I think we need to be more visible. Then we can take advantage of collaboration hubs as meeting platforms where you can meet people, and you can leverage these for strategizing grant applications. That's what I did with the recent C-Dream application that I submitted recently. And I think what I get the feeling from NCAMH is that we have cross-regional solidarity, and all are experiencing similar challenges, and we continue to learn from each other and motivate each other. That's the most important. Thank you. Now I think it's Q&A time. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cece. That was amazing. We have about 10 minutes of panel discussion where I'm going to ask questions to City and Juan together. Oh, and Anthony. Hello. So good to have you here. So I'm going to be asking some questions to the panel. But in the meantime, please do continue to submit any questions to the Q&A because I'm reserving those last 10 minutes or so for your questions. I want to make sure that the things you want to hear answered are answered. But while you're all here, I just wanted to start by saying, what changes when researchers working within LMIC settings are actually setting the research agenda rather than, sort of being tacked on to some other project. So, Anthony, would you mind giving us your reflections on that? What do you see change?
So, sorry, just maybe repeat your question for clarity.
Yeah,
So
sure.
get it right.
So when LMIC researchers are actually driving the research agenda, rather than being invited to join some existing project, what do you actually see changing? And thank you for joining us straight from your surgical
Yeah.
surgical consults. There we go.
I think probably many things will change. I think it has all sorts of direct as well as indirect effects. The indirect effects may be quite difficult to quantify, but they'd be maybe more qualitative. It's the idea of stepping up and taking a leadership role, taking responsibility, being encouraged to have broader vision, kind of bigger vision. So those are all some of the indirect ones. I think the direct ones and that are maybe a little bit more that are maybe a little bit easier to quantify are the ones in which the agenda itself changes. And it's like when we are working with patients or communities, we talk about lived realities and lived experience. And I think the lived realities and lived experience of LMIC researchers are the things that then change the agenda. It changes the questions that you ask, how you go about it. It changes the budget, the way the budget is oriented. And I think all of us know if there's a power differential between high-income countries and low middle-income country investigators, one of the first things that LMIC investigators don't have enough input is how the budget is developed and what are the project-related costs, but also the sustainability costs that are built into this budget. So I think everything changes. But as I said, some of them are obvious and quantifiable, and some of them are a little less obvious, a little less indirect, but every bit as real.
And Juan, what about you? What are you seeing change as you are seeing yourself and your colleagues beginning to, you mentioned the projects that rather than saying, here's an existing project, let's add Juan to it, we're demanding something new. What are you finding from that? What are you noticing?
Yeah, I agree with Anthony that there are direct and indirect aspects. I would say that one thing is important to move the agenda to low middle income is that it became easier to build up a program. Because usually what happens is when you are following the agenda from other countries' institutions, you need to jump to one program, from one program to the other. And you are looking for opportunities and you are adapting your lab, your structure, your research to fulfill that agenda. Instead, when you start setting the agenda, you can start building up a program, you can start building up resources, you can start building up story. And that's very important because since we are less people working on low middle income countries, and it's more fragmented, and it's more sparse, and many people go abroad and return to the country with knowledge, but still isolated from the local community. Having a program with an agenda that is determined and selected by the local people will help the community to start growing up, at least in some topics, but it will not diversify and it will be easier. And also there is a sense of responsibility feeling that is more non-tangible, it's more indirect, that is also important, that the local people start realizing that it's possible, it's doable, and you need to take the responsibility behind, because it's much more easier intellectually and emotionally even to follow the lead of somebody else. But to decide, okay, we need to set up an agenda. Which agenda we need to set up for Argentina, for South America, for low middle income countries? That require introspection, research, and responsibility. And that's important also to build up that idea in our countries.
City, you talked a lot about having the bravery, the willingness to step up and take that leadership. What do you want to see? What is the payoff for having got over that shyness when low and middle income country researchers are leading the research agenda?
Yeah, I think as Juan pointed out, I think the work is a bit more fragmented over here. I mean, we need to be more united and to share resources. Like, what is that we are trying to achieve? What is the problem that is more relevant to our community? So we need to step up and take leadership. So maybe we form like a group or a consortium or something, a regional consortium to solve one issue at least. Then, okay, what sort of resources that we have? So a sharing of resources, a sharing of ideas, and finding solutions that can suit our local issue. I think that is quite powerful, I think, because we can never match with the global north in terms of technology. So I think we need to find a solution based on the resources that we have. Sharing of resources is very important, and also try to be more, out there in terms of assuming leadership and so on. Don't just shy away, just stay behind. You need to be, more firm and more visible, and then we can form a nice group or consortium to solve an issue. Yeah, I think that would be ideal.
That's really interesting, the fact that the idea of trans-regional collaboration, cross-regional collaboration is so important. I mean, this is more of a comment than a question from Sunil, who's talking about doing mental health research in Nepal's high altitude region. Presents a unique set of interconnected challenges, spanning geography, culture, logistics, and the complex physiology of hypoxia itself. And the reason I'm mentioning that, not that there's a question there, is the fact that you have done these transnational collaborations, and yet there is such a strong localization component. So what are some of the things that translate specifically between low and middle income country-led research that isn't specifically about a particular condition, but is about the generalities of competing and leading in a world that is so biased towards higher income country outputs? And so to tack on to that, Pragya's comment that quite often high impact factor journals undervalue or even reject research that doesn't come from a high income country establishment. So if I can go to Anthony first, what are the things that you can work together on and collaborate on that aren't necessarily to do with the specific local challenges, but are to do with the general challenges of addressing that institutional bias?
That's a big question. I think I think some of us have local problems and conditions that we see regularly, but probably the vast majority of our lived experiences, there's certain commonalities to them. People get sick in all sorts of different ways, but they all get sick all over the world with some of the common conditions. They struggle with the same issues. I think one of the advantages about collaborating across these big divides even if it's not about a condition that's very specific, high altitude, HIV, tuberculosis, is the idea of well, there are two. One is I think there's just there are generally good reasons why you want to build sustainable programs everywhere. And that's not particularly limited to a particular set of skills like infectious diseases. I think the whole world benefits from that. And because you never know how populations are going to change kind of 10, 15, 20 years down the line. So it's preparing for the world that's coming. And the second thing is that of diversity of populations. So you can do a very, very nice study in developmental childhood, for example, in Cambridge or Oxford. But the results of your study might not exactly generalize across the world because the population of young children growing up in and around Cambridge aren't necessarily representative of the population across the world. So when you find a signal, it's hard to know what signal is part of the genetic or socio-cultural or socio-economic makeup of that particular region, or are you finding something that is biologically or physiologically true and generalizes across every population? And so the diversity of populations is really key. And when you get out into LMIC regions, population diversity just massively increases. Genetic diversity in Africa, I mean, just here in Cape Town, there's unbelievable genetic diversity in a small little area of the world. And then if you add to that the socioeconomic and sociocultural diversity, there are all these incredible opportunities to collaborate on conditions that everyone sees all over the world, but benefit from the fact that you're looking at all this diversity, so that when you find something, you know that this is something that is true for the human species, not true for human species in a particular context.
There's a really strong argument for the value of research in lower middle income countries, where it's far more representative of the world as a whole. Juan, can I turn to you and ask, what are the things that you have noticed in terms of collaborating on the NCAM program or elsewhere with other researchers that are facing similar resource or political constraints?
Yeah, in the meeting in Cape Town, I have the opportunity to talk with a researcher from low middle income countries from all over the world. And it's amazing how many of the barriers, problems are shared across the people. Many of the points that Anthony raised in the slides and I briefly touched in my presentation are extremely common and transversal across low middle income countries. And some of the problems, some of the barriers are also barriers in high income countries. It's not that bureaucracy for buying an equipment, it's only in South America. Issue is that the resources you have to overcome the barriers are different. While I was doing my postdoc in the US, we have two amazing secretaries that whenever you have some problem buying an equipment because there is some bureaucratic stuff that need to fulfill a form, you can request on them to fulfill the forms, to talk to the distributor. In Argentina, all this stuff is done by the researcher that is writing the grant, managing the money, ordering the staff, and even going to the customer area to pick up the package. So the problems are common. Some of them are a different magnitude. The lack of funding, it's a problem. I mean, if you ask to any scientist in the world, everybody will ask for more funding, even in NIH or the top lab in England. But the scale of the difference is the issue. The scaling of the lack of funding is the difference. It's a quantitative issue. But the lack of resources for institutional support and these kind of things, it magnifies these issues. And that is unique from low middle income countries, and I think it's transversal to all of them.
Yeah, that's really useful to hear. And City, what's your experience been of working not just in NCAM but with the the C project of seeing how research is done and how challenges are faced elsewhere?
I mean, the C project is just, I think, this year is the first call that concentrated for Southeast Asian researchers only, can only be led by Southeast Asian PIs and have to be in the form of a research consortium. So that was just a preliminary call. I just applied for it. It's not the result is not out yet, but I think NCAM really prepared me for that. I mean, it's like from the network that I have from NCAM, I can harness that. I mean, to include whom in my research projects. So I know somebody now in Vietnam, and I know somebody in Philippines, and my project leader in India, Dr. Pragya, under NCAM. So all of that, I mean, equip me with the next run application. It's like just Dr. Anthony mentioned in his presentation, we need to, have a preparation for LMIC researchers to be ready for open calls like that. And I think something that I learned also, the skills that we learn, the tools that we receive from the capacity building is actually to increase the confidence level. I mean, I would never imagine I would apply such scaled research grant. So hopefully, I can get positive outcome, but if not, I'll try for next one.
Well, best of luck with it. And yeah, I really hope that works well. We've only got about 4 more minutes and there are so many amazing questions, so I'm sorry we can't get to all of them. I'm trying to combine a few questions into one now. So obviously working across different countries and different cultural contexts, very valuable, but it's also combining fields like immunology and neurology a better way to get funding, as well as being a wider perspective on the issue being studied. So I think what I'll do is I'll mix it up a bit. City, can I come back to you? So working cross-disciplinary, how valuable has that been for you?
Yeah, that is very valuable. I mean, we cannot just, doing like a small scale research. I mean, ideally, we embark on this platform where all of us can chip in. I mean, we want the basic scientists, a fundamental bench scientist. We always want to, for our research to be able to be translated to the community at the end of it. So all of us need to combine our expertise. So from bench scientists to clinicians to then goes to the community. So then actually by having this kind of platform, multidisciplinary platform, is very important to actually achieve a more impactful research rather than publications. Yeah.
Yeah. And Juan, what's your experience been of interdisciplinary as well as international research?
Yeah, I think it's something that is critical. And thinking about this, perhaps low middle income countries has a small advantage on this, because since our community is usually smaller and technical resources are more limited, you naturally have more communication outside of your research, neuroscience people, field and area. Many times you need to interact with partners outside your field, be it neuroscience or whatever, just because the critical mass of investigators is more limited. So for instance, when you have an institutional seminar, sometimes it's about neuroscience, but sometimes it's about immunology in my department. So it's very common that we have multidisciplinary activities just because we are so few that we need to share resources. And when you have an invited guest from even other discipline, you know that this is a top leader in other whatever, you are interested to have this perspective. And so we are probably more naturally prone to interact with other disciplines. On top of that, we have all the difficulties of lack of funding and whatever we are talking before. But I think that could be even an advantage for us.
So I just want to say that really harks back to the Anthony's point about making a virtue out of necessity and the two sides of the coin. And I'm so sorry that we are out of time. to answer any more questions. I hope I've managed to cover as many of those as possible. I don't know if our speakers can see the Q&As. You might be able to type a few words as answers if possible to any of those. But in the meantime, thank you all once again for joining us today. Thank you so much to our speakers, Professor Anthony Fagaji, Dr. Juan Belforte, and Dr. Siti Yusuf. Please remember to fill in your surveys to receive your certificate of attendance. The link will be sent to you as soon as the webinar is finished. You will see a QR code on screen, 2 QR codes on screen to help you keep up to date with IBRO's news and Wellcome's funding opportunities. So thank you very much to the funders Wellcome who make this project possible, and to IBRO for developing and delivering the NCAMH project. So hopefully you have all found something useful out of today. You will be able to see this seminar back, or if you would like to share it with people, you can see the link to the YouTube channel here. And thank you once again to the team who've organised this, Angeliki. We've also got with us Adriatic, and also we have got with us, sorry, it's got to IBRO Secretariat. I'm really sorry. Chancel, there we go, Chancel. I'm so sorry for forgetting your name there, Chancel. It's been a really useful event for me. I hope it's been useful to you. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thanks all.
Thank you very much.
And sorry once again, Chancel.
Thank you.